Hello and welcome to the Arsenal Women Arsecast episode 90 and the first of the WSL season and the first of our new podcast. I don't think we're really giving it a name. I don't think we're going to call it the Arsenal Women Arsecast Extra because that's a bit of a mouthful, but it will take on the format for those of you who listen to the Arsecast Extra, which kind of takes place after every weekend game, and Andrew and James talk a bit about the game in the first half, break, and then in the second half take listener questions. And that is exactly the format we are going to take after every weekend game. And obviously this is the first one of the season, and delighted to welcome back our ongoing co-host for these shows, Jamie Spanger. Jamie, how are you doing after yesterday?
I'm very good, Tim. It was a big Super Sunday, especially in the Arsenal department. So I'm not going to say I've fully recovered, but I'm ready and excited to at least unpack the women's game.
Yeah, I think so much went on in this game, and I asked. I think I got the longest answer I've ever had from Jonas in a post-match press conference because I had so many questions that I asked this quite major one, and he spoke for about 5 minutes to it, which was great. But there was so much going on in this game tactically, and I know we just said off mic, having the men's game afterwards. I completely understand. I think it's good that broadcasters do this. I think it's really good that they went with the double bill and all of that. But just speaking selfishly, I hate it because it just leaves me drained. And I went to bed at 9:30 last night because I was shattered by the experience of watching both the games. Did you hang around and watch the men's game locally?
Yes, I did. Me and a couple of friends went to, I think it's called the Eaglet. It's down from the
Eaglet,
Emirates. Yeah, which was really, it was my first time there because we couldn't get in the Tolly. The line was round the block. So it was exhausting. And honestly, I thought we had it, but I won't talk further about that because I'm still recovering.
Yeah. I had the same thing. I kind of I aimed for the Tolly just because it's kind of the nearest place, and 10 minutes before kickoff there were about 10 people outside, and it was like, okay, I'm not getting in there. So I went down to the Coronet, which is the big Wetherspoons on Holloway Road, because if nothing else, it's enormous. And I can't imagine it could ever possibly be full. And we had this really weird thing where it was on about a 3-minute delay. So a big cheer went up when Arsenal scored, and we were like, what's going on? And the goal took a good 3 minutes to go in. So I spent the whole second half knowing the stream was about 3 minutes behind and just looking at my phone to see what had happened. So yeah, quite exhausting, but the women's game in its own right was pretty exhausting, I think, in a good way, pretty yo-yo. I think both managers referenced this post-match. Gareth Taylor was asked about playing a game this big, this early, and obviously the WSL engineer fixtures a little bit, and I think they're right to do so. And they kind of engineered this one, I think, with the Miedema reunion. And I know we chatted before the game about how much we both didn't like that. Gareth Taylor, and we believed that Miedema wouldn't. Gareth Taylor confirmed that afterwards, said that, she was not really relishing this so early. But yeah, at the same time, so much went on in this game. Let's start with the lineups because there were quite a few changes in the attacking area of the team. Leah Williamson wasn't in the squad, we're told, due to concussion protocol. Jonas was tight-lipped about whether she'll be ready for Thursday, but did say she wasn't close for this game, and I don't believe she was in the stadium either, so I'm not sure what that says for Thursday. So an enforced, well, it wasn't a change because she didn't start on Wednesday, but kind of an enforced switch at centre-half with Lotta and Kadina. But it was in the forward line where most of the changes were made. So Stina Blackstenius in for Alessia Russo, Frida Mornham in for Rosa Kafaji. Of course, that happened at half-time in Sweden. Caitlin Ford in for Beth Mead. Any surprises in there for you, and what do you think that said about maybe a bit of a reaction to Wednesday, but about Arsenal's game plan for this game?
Yeah, I think especially the biggest one for me was starting Stina over Alessia Russo. And I think it's a little bit short-sighted to say it's a form thing against Man City, because obviously that comes as a result of the tactical implications that Stina brings. But I think in terms of players like Alex Greenwood and Laia Alexandri, they are probably arguably the best centre-back pairing in the league. And I think they play very man-to-man defending, and it's very hard to work through them on the ground. And I think Jonas actually made that very smart decision to start Stina straight off the back, because you had to start them dynamically. You had to come on them straight away and over the top. And I don't think Alessia is that player. She's more of a, I want the ball at my feet, I'll play off you kind of striker. So I think Stina was the best option, and it would have been nice to see that kind of capitulate on the scoreboard, because we'll talk about missed chances later, but I think the tactical thing from Jonas worked, and he put in that decision to start Stina, and it worked for him. It just didn't work for the scoreboard because the chances were there. So that was probably the biggest one. But I think it's a run against form with Manchester City, but it's also, this is how we break down some really, really tight centre-backs that are excellent performers, especially against those top-level teams.
Yeah, I watched the City warm-up, and that's always a little tip, actually, if you're covering a game, to watch the teams warm-up, because you can get stuff from it. And one of the things City were practicing, they just had their back four in a line. One of their coaches was just floating balls like either over the top of them or straight at them. And I think they probably, maybe they do that all the time, I don't know, but I think I would speculate they saw Frida and Stina together. That's a very established partnership for Arsenal. We do see it usually when Stina starts, Frida starts behind her, and it usually indicates that Arsenal are prepared to be quite direct. And if you look back to the goal that Arsenal beat City with in this fixture last season, it's Katie McCabe floating the ball over the top and Stina scoring. So I think City knew what was coming. And I think what's really interesting about this game, this is the big question I asked Jonas. I said, I felt like the game plan was phased into segments of the game. And he kind of said it was, and that he wanted Stina there to really test their backline. But he felt that as the game went on and it got a bit more stretched, that tactic might have less relevance. And at that point, he wanted to change the wide players in the centre forward when he felt the game would be more stretched. So I think what you really see, Jamie, in the first half in particular, is that Arsenal are compact. They're happy to let City have the ball and then to hit them over the top. But in the second half, I think that changes a bit. Is that what kind of came out from you? Let's stick to the first half in terms of Arsenal's approach.
Yeah, definitely. It was a direct brand of football, and I think it was fast-paced as well, and we'll talk about it a little more with Frida's first goal, but it felt as if they were always ready to kind of catch City on the break, and they were patient and compact in terms of moving as a unit, and I'm sure we'll speak more about the defence and how they maybe did that a lot better compared to the game against Häcken in the midweek. But I think for Arsenal, it was interesting as well, speaking about what Gareth Taylor said, because he kind of said, I don't think Arsenal really capitalised on our inability to adapt. And I think Jonas was maybe thinking too much ahead in terms of phasing out his game plan, because I think Alex Greenwood, Laia Alexandri, even Kirsten Kasparai, they didn't adapt to that. And there was probably room to keep doing it. And I think Jonas maybe thought they would have clued in, considering how high quality that defence is. So I thought it was good, and I think I would have probably, I'm not a manager and I'm in no way qualified to make these opinions, but I think I would have done the same thing from the touchline. And I think to beat a team like City, you have to have that kind of phased game plan, and it worked in the first half. I thought Arsenal were very unlucky, and we'll speak about the equaliser from Viv later, but I thought they were the better team and had the better chances across the full 90, but especially in the first half.
Yeah, I found that really interesting from Gareth Taylor when he said he didn't feel Arsenal exploited the space in behind the fullbacks enough, which, considering Arsenal, scored twice and both from wide positions, they're both low. Well, Rosa Kafaji hits the post, Caitlin Ford, and they got a couple of one-on-ones. Stina has that chance as well that's very similar to the goal she scores against City at Meadow Park last season. And I agree with Gareth Taylor. I really thought City were there for the taking in that respect, because the challenge City pose you is that they keep their wide players very, very high up the pitch, and that turns it into a game of chicken, because on one hand, they're so dangerous from that position, but on the other hand, neither of their wide players track back. So if you do play past their pressure, you do get one-on-ones with their fullbacks, and that's exactly where the goals come from. And I think Gareth Taylor was right that Arsenal didn't make enough of that. But one of the other things, Jamie, about the way Arsenal play City, and I kind of said this before the game, because of City's wide threat, because they press unusually with their wingers coming in, what Arsenal always try to avoid doing, they try to avoid the second pass being to a fullback. So they do one or two things. They either wait for the wide players to converge and then clip the ball over their head to the fullbacks, or If they don't do that, they leave the fullbacks out, because what they don't want to do is get caught in wide areas on the ball, because that's where City are really strong. So the centre of the team was always going to be really, really important. And Leah Williamson was already lost to that. So the central midfield was somewhere I was curious about before the game. We've got some questions in the second half about the defensive side of the central midfield, but Jonas Eidevall did stick with Kim Little and Kyra Cooney-Cross, which we've seen in all the competitive games so far this season. I did wonder whether he might bring Leah Volti in. That is a curiosity that will remain for me until Thursday. I do think there is a call for her to come in, but were you surprised at all by the central midfield staying the same or not?
I wasn't particularly surprised by the lineup. I think now, pondering back, I think Leah came on and did make a difference. But I thought Kyra and Kim, especially Kyra, was quite a solid performer, more defensively than we usually see her. I think that's definitely an area to improve. We've spoken about that a lot. And in the first 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes before Viv had scored, I think she really caught her out the game completely. She didn't have a lot of time on the ball. So I wasn't surprised by the lineup. I think especially given how they performed, that midfield performed against City last year at the Joy Stadium. I think Kyra especially did a very good job at like that zonal kind of 6 double pivot role. So I wasn't surprised by the lineup, and I also wasn't surprised by the substitutes. And I think all equally performed pretty decently. It's just about how they reacted when City really drowned out the midfield and kind of made that more of a condensed area. I think there was a lot of struggle there, and there was a lot of unforced error that perhaps we wouldn't expect from a player like Kim Little across the field. But in terms of lineups, I wasn't surprised by who he opted with, and I was pleasantly surprised by their performance as well.
Yeah, and you talk about like some uncharacteristic kind of mistakes, but the first big incident of the game really, and this is what I was talking about in terms of Arsenal wanting to keep the ball very central when they built out from the back, and of course they lose the ball in quite a dangerous position, and Vivian Miedema wins it back. And that shot, I thought that was in. Actually, I mean, the second it left her foot, I thought it was going to go in because we know Viv well enough to know that she's perfectly capable of scoring from there. But it just drifts wide. And one of the interesting things Jonas said in his post-match press conference was that he was really impressed with his team because that happened. They got the goal kick and they went and did the same thing again, and they actually score from it. And he talked about kind of the mental resilience of his players to not question the kind of the tactic of playing through the centre. But I guess what did you make of that quite mad 45 seconds where City go so close to going 1-0 up and then Arsenal do play through? Good low cross by Caitlin Ford. I think it hits Stina Blackstenius on the heel. Frida Mornham comes in and scores. I don't think we're accustomed to that in these games, like having early in the game like a big kind of mad minute like that.
Yeah, honestly, I just think when the ball came off Viv's foot, my head was already in my hands because 97% of that time that ball hits the back of the net. So I was very surprised. And on like reflection, I thought it was going in anyway. I had no clue that was floating just wide. So I think that was a bit of a hold your breath moment. I feel like it might have been written in the stars. So luckily it wasn't. But in terms of the response, I think that's something we've seen a little bit more from Arsenal, especially over the preseason. Well, not the preseason, those competitive Champions League games. I'll say, I think there's a little bit more like they're creating a stylistic identity, and then maybe it's a bit more of now, okay, look, this WSL season is the chance to really, really take it, because there's no reason why Arsenal can't win by a large margin, I think, especially with the turnover of the other top sides. So I think there's been a bit of a mental shift, and you could see that, especially the ability to keep the game at extend that lead to 3-1 yesterday. I think that was something that Arsenal might have struggled with in the past, especially against teams like maybe we saw Chelsea at Stamford Bridge last season. So it did feel for me there was a bit of a resilience and a mentality shift. And I think that was a really positive takeaway that I haven't seen a lot of people speak about out of yesterday, to keep that scoreline at 2-1, respond with Mead. But that sequence with that goal was a prime example of that. It was, okay, that didn't work this time. Kim Little's not going to make that mistake every time. We can probably trust that play out to come out the same way. And I think Emily Fox was very dynamic in that movement. She was a big part of that. But for me, it was a mentality shift to be able to say, okay, that almost ended terribly. However, let's run it back. Let's do it again. And I think that is a big kudos to the mentality that was brought to the Emirates yesterday that perhaps we've seen waver over recent years.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that 60 seconds just completely encapsulated the game and the conundrum of playing against Man City. Like, you've got to be brave and play through their pressure, but that's hard and they can punish you. But once you do, and again, Gareth Taylor was asked about this after the game because they keep their wingers really, really high. And obviously they do that because if you go and attack them and you don't score, then they're going to be free and they're going to be very high up the pitch. But also they had like their two number eights of Viv Miedema and Jess Park. And then they've got Hasegawa at the base of midfield, who is possibly one of the finest players in that position in the world, but was a number 8 before she came to Man City. So you've got these three quite attacking midfielders in terms of one used to be a striker, one used to be a winger, and one used to be a number 8. And Gareth Taylor talked about, we sometimes give up territory because we want those players going forward. And I think you saw that. You saw the yin and yang of that in that 60 seconds. But with the goal, once Caitlin gets the ball out wide, it's one-on-one. And Arsenal created a lot of those kind of one-on-ones, got a lot of those balls over the top. Frida there with a really good kind of secondary run. And for all the very justified quibbles about finishing with Arsenal, because I think that's a big problem. And we will come on to it in the second half because we had loads of questions about it. When Frida faces the goal like that and it's coming onto her foot, I do trust her with those finishes. But after that, Jamie, the game, I think, takes on a real obvious pattern, which we kind of touched on, which is Arsenal mega compact. I took a few photos from the press box because I was near the halfway line, and every single one, it's like a foosball table, 4-4-2, kind of off the ball with Frida and Stina pushing. And I think Jonas has talked a lot about trying to establish partnerships within this team with a lot of players in and out. But Frida and Stina is one of the more established partnerships, particularly off the ball. And Arsenal were very, very compact. And I don't know about you, but until the City equaliser, we should mention, we'll talk a bit about Katie McCabe because we've got a question about her in the second half, but she makes a really good block. But until that equaliser, I felt more like Arsenal were going to catch City on the counter and go 2-0 up than concede an equaliser. Was that your feeling?
Definitely. I thought it looked definitely that way. And I think City was struggling to organise themselves. And it's unfortunate because obviously Stina had some really missed opportunities. And you speak about partnerships. I thought Frida was, in my opinion, one of our best players. I think Frida and Laia were probably up there. But they were both playing so high, but Frida was still able to drop back. And I think the biggest miss was maybe when Stina was 1-on-1 with Yamashita and it went straight to her. We obviously got that again with Russo in the second half, but the ball for Frida to wheel, turn around and find her, that partnership feels like it's connected without even having to speak about it. So I really like watching them, and it's hard because I also love watching Alessia start, and I think she brings so much that Stina maybe doesn't, and vice versa. But I thought Frida herself opens up Stina in this new way that maybe the other midfielders can't find her, and then she maybe looks a little bit more lost without Frida on the field. So that was really impressive and delightful to see as well, because I think Frida deserves her chance. And in terms of your question on the swing of things before that equaliser, it felt as if City were they were sitting ducks in that back line. They were pressing forward, but when players like Lauren Hemp and Fagino were quite wasteful, it felt as if it was an immediate threat, even when Arsenal didn't have the ball in their final third. So it was annoying that it wasn't capitalised on, because it's not like the chances didn't arise. The chances did arise. Stina had a few. Frida had a couple. So it was frustrating. That equaliser, especially before halftime, is one that always bites teams and really hurts teams, especially leading out to the second half, which I don't think we actually saw with Arsenal. But it was a bad time to concede, because I did think City looked stressed and they looked disorganised as soon as Arsenal won back possession, even if that was in the defensive third.
Yeah, definitely. We do. What's kind of, I think both managers referred to this game being really stimulating. So, sorry, I didn't finish my thing earlier when I was talking about Gareth Taylor talking about the two teams playing each other so early in the season. And he kind of said to the journalist that asked it, he said, well, did you enjoy that game? It's like, yeah, hell yeah. And he's like, well, there you go. Like, if it had been like a cagey, boring 0-0, maybe there would be some justification for saying these games shouldn't happen this early in the season, which they don't tend to in the Premier League. In the Premier League, they tend to keep the big teams apart for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And, Jonas Eidevall said the game was very stimulating. He talked about how he was going to have to go for a run later on because he had like because he felt tired because of like the nervous energy and the fact that like in these games as a coach, you're making decisions in every second of the game. Everything you do counts. And he says that like it's kind of I relate to this actually watching these games. It's kind of a strange thing where your mind feels so stimulated, but you're not actually moving. So you don't actually get any kind of energy out. And I think on Frida and Stina, there's a really illustrative part where Frida has the ball coming towards the edge of the area and no one closes her down and she shoots and it goes over. But that's because Stina's pinning the centre-backs and creating that kind of space. And I think that's one of the things Arsenal really get from that relationship. But we do have to discuss the equaliser. There was an air of inevitability about it, but I think this game's so interesting that honestly, I think Vivianne Miedema scoring against Arsenal is not really even in my top 3 takeaways from this game, but she does. And on one hand, I feel this is quite an unfortunate goal. There's a couple of ricochets. The shots takes a big deflection and Manu's wrong-footed, I think, quite understandably. Even, I think it deflects off Laia Cadena. I don't even think, because sometimes like defenders do that when they turn away and it deflects the ball towards goal. I don't even think she does that. I think it's just an awkward angle. And at the time I was thinking, my God, that is so fluky. But on the other hand, in the first couple of minutes, they do nearly score through Viv, and they probably should have scored in that earlier chance. So I guess we have to broach, particularly in the kind of, with the theme of Arsenal not finishing very well in this game, Vivianne Miedema coming in, scoring, albeit a deflected goal. And I guess what was your feeling about the goal and maybe up until half time after that?
Yeah, the Viv goal, it did feel a little bit inevitable considering just the whole narrative. But like you said, Tim, I think the game had so much more to unpack that wasn't my thought after the game. And I think even Jonas got asked about it in his post-match presser. How did you feel about Viv scoring? And his reaction was, I felt like a player was scoring against Arsenal. It was conceding before half time. It wasn't, okay, that's our ex-player. And I think the chances were there for our strikers, and there's much to say, if it were Viv one-on-one with the keeper. But it's not Viv. She plays for Manchester City now. We'll unpack that in a different way. But I think the goal was hard because, again, it's something like the Kim Little scuffle. It was like Viv had backheeled it. Kim had tried to deflect it. It had awkwardly deflected again. Things like that don't always happen, especially with someone like Kim Little. And it was just a little bit of, there was a scuffle in the feet. Sometimes that gets paid as a foul each way. Whose, I don't know. So it felt unlucky. And especially for Cadena, I thought she defended really well. And I watched the Viv goal back like so many times in slow motion to see, is that going on target if Cadena doesn't touch it? And it almost does look like it might be hitting the top right corner. It's a great strike anyway. But I also think Manu is diving the right way. She got caught out because of the deflection, and it's a hard one as well because Cadena's back is probably correctly to goal. How many times that ball hits her back on that angle and goes in is so low. So it's one of those goals it's preventable, but it's also it's hard. It's a difficult one to concede, mainly because does that happen all the time given those circumstances? So it's one that's before halftime and it maybe kills the mentality, but I didn't think Arsenal dropped after that. And obviously Stina had a really good chance directly after it as well. So I don't know if it really turned Arsenal mentally off. So I think it was a hard goal to concede, but I think the response was positive.
Yeah, definitely. Stina has that one-on-one. Again, it's a great through ball by Frida. Again, that partnership kind of working. But again, sometimes when Stina goes through on goal and has time to think about it, like her first touch it's not terrible, but it's not amazing. It takes her a bit too close to the City goalkeeper. And by the time she gets there, there's not an awful lot else she can do because the touch isn't clean. I think Stina's a much better finisher when it's instinctive. And like when she goes through on goal, I don't get that, that's going to be a goal feeling, Whereas when the ball drops to her, I kind of do get that feeling a bit more. I think she's a very good first-time finisher, and yeah, that felt again illustrative. And we've got questions in the second half about the finishing, so we're not dodging that. We're going to come back to it as more of a theme in the second half of the show. But that is, particularly in the context of Arsenal having 2 one-on-ones, arguably 3, where Stina has another one where maybe she can lob the goalkeeper instead of going round her. It's difficult to escape the fact that is a theme for Arsenal. It's one I'm personally worried about for the season. I don't think Arsenal have enough killer instinct in the final third. But we come to half-time, second half, things change a little bit. I think almost immediately you can see that Arsenal have a bit more intent, and this is not going to be a half where Arsenal are happy to sit off in a 4-4-2 block and go over the top. And then very early in the second half, Caitlin Ford does put the ball in the net. And when you consider Arsenal won this on XG, as it were, and that effort didn't count because it was offside towards the XG total, I imagine that's a 0.7 or 0.8 XG chance. And it certainly would have been a goal. The replay seemed to show that she was marginally onside. Do you have any issue with that decision at all?
Honestly, I think when there's no VAR in the women's game, my first instinct as soon as it hit the back of the net was she's offside. Rewatched it and she was kept onside, but you can understand on first glance why that was called offside. And there's a whole conversation to be had about VAR. Should we have it? Should we not? Because it was onside at the end of the day. And it's not like it was one of those ones that's like, oh, she was onside, but this happens. If it's onside, it's a goal. There's no other factors to check. However, I can see why that was called offside. My first instinct was that ball's hit the back of the net and is offside. So it's hard because that momentum would have completely shifted the game, especially because Arsenal were hungry. City, again, looked like sitting ducks in that defence. And the whole build-up, that whole notion of that Caitlin Ford goal, the centre-backs are in no man's land. You should never be keeping your player, especially a winger, who's not only come into the back post, but has basically come onto your keeper alone. So it was frustrating in hindsight, but in person, until I saw the replay, I said, yeah, that's fair enough, that's offside.
Yeah, I mean, this just depends on where you stand on VAR. Personally, I've got no time for it, don't like it at all. And I don't think that's a ricket from the lines, from the assistant referee at all. It's really marginal. My first reaction when a goal like that goes in is to look at the assistant. So, it's not like, obviously in the press box you don't get up and cheer, but internally I didn't, I was like, oh, that might be offside. And it wasn't, but we're talking I don't know, a knuckle or something. And I don't want VAR, so I'm kind of happy to swallow that, really. But I mean, I think maybe before we go to the substitutions, because Caitlin comes off for Beth Mead, but one of the things Arsenal kind of did in the second half, they moved Caitlin in a little bit in the build-up to give themselves another kind of outball. Obviously Caitlin didn't start in Sweden, but she comes back into the team for this game. What did you make of her performance? I thought she was great in this game.
Yep, I think both games that Caitlin has played in front of Emily Fox on that right side, she's been superb. Obviously, the Rangers game, she was unbelievable. And then we have a look at the game yesterday, and I thought she was causing horrors for that back line. I think obviously Layla Wahabi went down, then Alexandria had to play in an unnatural position at left back. So I thought Ford was really, really excellent. And I think a lot of that comes down to Emily Fox. And as you said, she kind of drifted more centrally, Caitlin Ford, that is. And that is also because Fox allows her to come in on the side. Fox loves an overlap, and I think Ford also does really well. We've seen it for years with Steph Catley. She does really well at coming back and dropping back and defending. So I think that partnership is one that's particularly exciting for me. And I also think that is fueled as well by the confidence with Mariona on the left wing, and that helps Caitlin Ford a lot. So I thought she was superb yesterday, and I was really, really happy to see her playing in the starting lineup because I knew she'd be in that right wing position behind Emily Fox, and I think there's a lot of merit to be taken from that partnership in particular.
Yeah, definitely. Emily Fox just makes such a difference to this team. I think that's going to go down as one of Jonas's best signings. I'm going to come on to even though the substitutions with Beth Mead and Rose Kafaji and Alessia Russo happened before City go 2-1 up, I kind of think it's more relevant to talk about it, obviously in the context of the equaliser and what comes afterwards. So we'll skip forward a bit and come back to that. But City do go 2-1 up with a Jess Park wonder goal that strangely satisfying. Well, not satisfying from an Arsenal perspective, but objectively satisfying the way it goes in off the underside of the bar. And Jonas, referred to this afterwards, said we had a really tough spell after that where City could easily have made it 3-1. And I think there are two things I didn't like about this performance. I thought Arsenal played really well and deserved to win. There were two things I didn't like about the performance. The finishing, again. The other thing I didn't like was I thought Arsenal were very consistently caught by the second ball off crosses. We all know that City are great. They by miles and miles cross the ball more than any other Premier League team, and that's obviously because they're really quality wingers and they have an amazing striker. Like, there's no secret to why they do that and why they're so threatening there. And I think the two centre halves, Lotta and Laya Kadina, do brilliantly at getting the first contact on those crosses. Bunny Shaw does not. I can't really remember her having a headed attempt at goal, which is very unusual. I think that's because the centre halves do their job brilliantly at defending the 6-yard box. The bit I didn't like was the ball kept dropping to the edge of the area, and I think Kim and Kyra were nearly every time the wrong side of City, of like Miedema, Jess Park, those players looking to pick up those clearances. And I actually didn't like their performances yesterday defensively because of that. And there's actually a situation very late in the game where, again, Kim is on the wrong side of, I think, can't remember if it's Hemp or Kelly, and she trips her. And I just thought that was constant in this game. And it happens really with this goal. Again, ball drops to the edge of the area. It's an amazing shot from Jess Park. It's almost like a once or twice a season thing. But I don't know about you, that happened a lot in this period where Arsenal are up against it. They keep clearing the first cross, but then the central midfielders are just the wrong side of City's midfielders, and felt like we conceded a lot of big chances because of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a discipline thing in terms of there's the big threat up front, and I think Arsenal often get caught out mentally focusing on that big threat. But when you look at it historically, especially over the last 2 seasons, last four or five games against City, it's never been Bunny Shaw imposing that threat. And it's like they've wrapped that up. They've nullified that threat. Even against City last year in the away leg, when Stina came back and won that game 2-1, the goal from Lauren Hemp was on the edge of the area. She drove in and the midfielders didn't come and cover. And it feels as if, I don't know if it's a mental thing, but like, let's put all our attention on Bunny Shaw. Jess Park and Viviana Miedema are just as threatening as Bunny Shaw, especially against Arsenal. So it was a lack of discipline, and I think there was a lot of that from Kim. And I think Kyra defensively, she's getting better at that zonal work and tracking back that way. But I think in terms of discipline, we've seen Kyra for the Matildas, seen Kyra for Arsenal time and time again, really lack that second bite to get goal side of her player. And I'd like to say it's uncharacteristic for Kim because I don't think it is usual for her to be like that. But yesterday it felt as if both of them were getting caught out, and it was Chloe Kelly, and we were lucky that free kick went straight into the wall because that was very opportunistic. And for a player like Alex Greenwood with her left foot to have that, you don't want that happening. It's a silly free kick to give away, especially against City. So I would agree with you. I think that discipline is different. And I wonder whether it comes from a threat of let's nullify their striker and forget about everyone else.
Yeah, and it's why I wonder whether, the time for Leah Volti to come back into the team is coming a little bit. And to be fair to Kim, because of injuries in midfield, she's basically played every minute of every game pre-season as well. I thought maybe that played into a little bit into Russo not starting as well, because Stina had a knock in pre-season. So Russo had a big pre-season, took a lot of minutes while Stina was getting back. So I think it made some sense there as well. But let's talk then a little bit about the attacking changes, which do end up making the difference. Beth Mead comes on. Rosa Kafaji comes on and plays on the wide left. And I think this is really interesting. We have a question about it in the second half, but I kind of asked Jonas about that, and he said that basically because games against City are really defined in the wide areas, both going back and coming forwards, he wanted fresh legs on either side. And this kind of plays into an answer I got from him in a press conference on Friday, where I asked him about Lena Hurtig being injured and him not having those 4 wide players. And he gave that answer about, about the budget, which the subtext to that was, we were trying to throw our entire budget at Kira Walsh, who was at the game with the Williamson family yesterday. Obviously, they're very good friends, but nonetheless, Kira Walsh, having been subject to a world record bid from Arsenal on deadline day, is almost immediately seen at the Emirates, which, might say something. But yeah, so Rosa Kafaji was used wide, and Jonas said he wanted to switch both the wide players, but he didn't take Mariana off. He didn't want to take her off, so he put her central. And obviously, this is where the goal comes from. Rosa Kafaji, I got no problem with her playing wide. I think she's got the skills for that. Hits the post, ball comes to Beth Mead. And for me, Beth Mead is the only player in the squad who, when the ball drops to in the area, I expect her to score. And her record shows you that. She is the ruthless finisher in the squad. I think there are some other players who've got to come up to that level. And I guess, what did you make of some of those attacking changes and how they contribute to the equaliser? And then after that, Russo, no, it was before, wasn't it, that Russo goes through one-on-one with one of the worst one-on-one finishes I think I've ever seen, to be fair.
Let's speak positives first. I'll start positives. Rosa Kafaji on the left wing, loved that. I really, really loved that. And I think we expected her to come in as an attacking midfielder. And I loved that you asked about it in the press conference, because he gave a really good answer about that ability for her to be able to do both, and why that was, especially with Mariana in the 10. I think that was really exciting. And Kirsten Kasperide, to be honest, I think she had a very poor performance, if I'm being honest, across the board against all wingers that were kind of up against her, and especially against Caldente as well. But Rosa Kafaji is the exact player you want to capitalize on, a player that's maybe on the weaker foot, a bit slow. She's a street baller. She's going to take you on. She's not going to be worried about doing that. And even taking the shot was a good option as well. Like, she could have teed it up, but it worked in the end. And I think it was exactly what Arsenal needed, just that ruthless player that kind of wanted to storm the area and say, all right, let's get the equaliser. Because then you come to Alessia Russo, and that was terrible. Can I be honest? Like, she was coming in one-on-one, and I think the Stina one, she does tend to overthink, and that is the kind of player she is. But Russo, I'm always backing her to score those goals. And it wasn't even the position she found herself in. She was one-on-one the keeper. It was the fact that it trickled to the goalkeeper, and the goalkeeper just caught it. Like, at least you want that keeper. You want Yamashita to be palming that away if she's saving it. So I thought that was really, really disappointing. And I think Russo needs to find her form. And I think she's a big, big confidence player, and it will come. She's got the talent. We've seen it at the Emirates before in terms of those exact finishes. So I'm not immediately worried, but I am definitely worried. So that's one thing. And then with Beth Mead, I think that was a good move when it was made. Again, she's the one player that puts the ball in the back of the net when you ask it of her. So it was a good move, and I really liked the fact that he switched both the wingers but still kept Mariana on the field, because she had a good performance. She was turning out that right side, inside and out for City. So I like the substitutions. I think they were made at the right time, and it's really disappointing that those goals weren't capitalised on from Russo, because I think it could have been a very good managerial performance, in my opinion.
Yeah, with that Russo chance, in fairness, you're right. I think one-on-one she's usually very good. Like, there's in pre-season when she goes through in the Spirit game one-on-one, and she just shifts the ball onto her left foot and takes it, and you think, yeah, that's a smart, confident finish. And there you see, Jonas Eideval made that comment about her being the best finisher he's ever worked with, which, some people, I think understandably, given that he's worked with Vivian Miedema, some people kind of cock an eyebrow at that. I think as well, like, maybe this is just the angle I was at, but Rosa Kafaji is open on the back post. And I kind of think if you're going to finish like that, it's kind of because you're not very confident at scoring or you're snatching at it, give it to Kafaji. And it reminded me, I watched the Brighton game on Saturday, Brighton-Everton, and I can't remember how to pronounce her name. Seki scores the hat-trick. And there are two goals where really she should pass the ball. But one, she decides instead to lob the goalkeeper from 35 yards, and the other one on her hat-trick, she just smashes it in from the edge of the box. And it's one of those where really, ideally, she should have passed in both situations. But if you're going to shoot. get your foot behind it, get the contact on it. Like, don't like. I'm not even sure that would have gone in, to be honest. I'm not sure I had enough strength to go over the line, but I think you're right. I don't think Russo usually has an issue finishing those chances, but I think you're right. She's a confidence player, and I do think a lot rests this season on her becoming that really killer finisher who does like Bunny Shaw, Sam Kerr things, because that's kind of where Arsenal are. But we'll talk about that a little bit in the second half. Before we go to go for a break and have, in fact, I'm going to start with a question actually, then go to the break and we'll take some more questions. But this kind of summed up what I wanted to ask you anyway, and it's from our Arseblog Discord, which you get access to if you subscribe on Patreon. It's from NDSSD. I've read and heard that Arsenal should be happy with the draw yesterday, but can't help but feel disappointed. We had chances to win it, and the lack of a cutting edge in front of goal seems to be rearing its ugly head again. Can't help but contrast Viv taking a half chance and scoring, albeit via deflection. But how do you think we should all feel after this game? And that's kind of to wrap up part one. I flip-flopped on this in the immediate aftermath of the game, because I think when you're 2-1 down to City with 10 minutes to go, you'd definitely take a draw, and I would have taken a draw before the game. But objectively, I think Arsenal missed an opportunity to win this. Like, how do you feel emotionally about the result?
Yeah, a bit of both, to be honest. I think we spoke about it predictions post-game, Tim, and you said I feel like these two teams are waiting to have a draw. So we're going to blame you for that one. But in terms of the game, I think when it finished, it's this immediate relief because it's 2-2 and it could have been worse. But then when the dust settles, I was a little bit disappointed because I think the better chances definitely were in Arsenal, and we saw that particularly in XG, and I know we'll speak about that a bit more, but it felt as if the missed opportunities and the momentum Arsenal had it for maybe 60 out of 90 minutes. I think 10 were maybe neutral, and 20 of those minutes City probably had the upper hand. So it felt as if before the game, everything looks better in hindsight, and you're kind of saying a draw would be great against this Manchester City team, but then you're looking at the performance, and it's probably one of those ones where it's, yeah, I know they're a good side, but Arsenal should have won and they should have capitalised. So it's a bit of a disappointing result, but again, it could be worse, and there's still that relief of if it had been a loss, it would have been a lot worse, given literally because of the point and also because of the fact that I thought Arsenal played way better.
Yeah, and I think we are, whether people like it or not, we are kind of in a situation where kind of everything that happens feels like a referendum on the manager, and that's really not what I personally take from this game, even if I understand why that's a wider discussion. And I kind of go into these games now thinking, oh God, like if Arsenal lose, this is just gonna become like really dark really quickly, which is why before the game I just thought I'd take a draw and just get this game out of the way, get the Viv thing out of the way, and let's get on with the season type thing. But at the same time, do think that finishing, that does concern me. I think there's going to have to be some players are going to have to show some things they're capable of, but haven't shown yet. I think would be my kind of summary. So, jury's out a little bit on that, but we'll cover some of those bigger themes with your questions in the second half, right after this. Okay, we're back with the Arsenal Women Arsecast with me, Tim Stillman, and our co-host Jamie Spanger. In the second half, we will give those over to questions that we will take from a variety of the Arseblog Discord, threads, and Twitter. Jamie, do you want to ask the first question, or do you want me to ask the first question?
Why don't you start us off, Tim?
Okay, I will start us off. Quite a lot of them are about finishing, which we've covered to some degree, but we'll perhaps go on to that a little bit more, I guess, kind of thematically. But I'll start with this one. It's from our Discord, Mr. Snurub, which is a great Simpsons reference. Do you think the focused wing play seen yesterday will be a trend for the rest of the season? Ford and Blackstenius made life very difficult for the City fullbacks. How do you see this as like a tactic for this game, or something we'll see more of this season?
Yeah, I'm going to give a flip-floppy answer and say a bit of both. But like you touched on earlier, Tim, in terms of City's fullbacks play quite in line, but then their wingers don't drop back. So there's a lot of opportunity for Arsenal to capitalise on that in the width because you don't have that extra pressure. So I think it was tactical. I think a lot of it would have surrounded the fact that that's how City play. However, I also think Arsenal aren't a team that are going to adapt too much to another team. I think Jonas has the idea of what he wants to play and he will play with that. So I think it's something that we will see in that kind of high pressing forward and those wingers that can maybe also come in and also play wide. And the fullbacks were really good yesterday. I thought McCabe and Fox were both really, really beneficial to the side. So I would like to see that going forward. I hope it's not just a tactic because of Man City. However, I do think that was definitely a part of the reason Arsenal played so overload on the width. But I would like to see that going forward. However, I do think there was an element of it that was, okay, we'll adapt to how City play because they don't have that added pressure. Their wingers don't drop back defensively. So I'd like to see that kind of game plan. I think it worked, and I think we also saw it versus Rangers. I know it's not the same as Manchester City without undermining the Scottish League, but I would like to see that going forward. But I do think it was very determined on the way Manchester City kind of organised their defence.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is one of Jonas's strengths, formulating individual game plans for these big games, which I think is why the record is so good against the big teams. Obviously, the question is in the other games, and can Arsenal do things like just let their talent win the game against teams like Leicester, for example, next week? But okay, have you got a question for me, Jamie?
I sure do. So I've got one from X. It's from Stu. It's at 38 game season.
Oh, yes, I had this one, so I'm glad you're going to ask this.
That is, did we pick a team to detain City or win the game?
Yeah.
I think it's difficult. I think it's a hard one. There's a bit of both.
Yeah. I picked this question out as well because of that. I think, because again, I think that gets to the real nub of this game. And I think the answer is both. I do think it was slightly more about playing on City's weaknesses. So, like the difference in the first half where you start, and again, some of this will have been a bit dictated by the fact that Arsenal took an early lead, but really being prepared to sit off, let City have the ball, have that 4-4-2 block and hit them over the top. That was both about containing them, but also about playing on some of their weaknesses. And then Arsenal got more aggressive in the second half. But so I think like the lineup, for example, was more about City's weaknesses. But some of the things Arsenal did and always do against City, what I talked about earlier, the way they build from the back, they keep the ball central, they try to keep the ball away from City's wide players. Obviously, that is very respectful of the threat that City cause you. And you can see, as we discussed earlier, how determined Arsenal were to stop Bunny Shaw and to clear those crosses when they came in, almost to your point, Jamie, at the expense of some of the threats they have on the edge of the area. So, when you play a game like this, you have to do both sides of it. But I think the fact that Arsenal created nearly a whole goal more in XG than City and had that Caitlin Ford goal disallowed kind of justifies that approach. I think it was both, but I'm not, I think it was maybe 70% about City's weaknesses and 30% about respecting their strengths, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I thought mainly from the lineup, it was let's kind of exploit City in and behind. Let's work through their weaknesses and also nullify their threats. So I think that kind of pre-game element was definitely working to detain City. However, I think through doing that, they were trying to win the game. Because you're picking on City's weaknesses through, okay, Alex Greenwood and Lyra Alexandria, they play man-to-man. They're very weak at the back when you put that ball over. That's detaining City. That's working on their weaknesses, but that's always also trying to win the game. And I thought as soon as Frida scored and Stina had those chances, this has Chelsea at the Emirates last December 4-1 written all over it. And I think if those chances have gone ahead, it was like that. Arsenal had that. And I think there's a lot of perception of if you're kind of adapting to the opposition, you're not sure in your game plan. That's just not true. That's just football. You have to work on the opposition, especially when they're as good as Manchester City. So I thought it was an aim to detain, but it also was a very, very solid bid to win. And it was unfortunate that those goals and those chances weren't capitalised because it could have been a very dominant performance.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing about this question really is City's biggest strength going forward as their biggest weakness going backwards. So so much is defined by what you do in the wide areas, both defending their threat, but then trying to capitalise on it. And that's really why it's a bit of both, because you've got to look after your wide areas defensively, but you can really get them offensively, and both Arsenal's goals come from out wide. And speaking of out wide, this is a question from Twitter from at 07quad. Kafaji got some good chances from the left yesterday. Is this somewhere we're likely to see her more often? And is it tactical, or is it just a way of getting her more minutes, a la when Arsenal signed Palova? She played on the right a little bit. I like the idea of her and Mariona rotating between the left wing and the 10, but don't know what that would actually look like. So I guess the question really is, do you think we'll see that more often this season? Or again, do you think this was a bit of a special tactic for City to play Kafaji on the left?
I think we'll see it a little bit, and if not a lot more this season. Going on what you said before, Tim, about how you spoke to Jonas on Friday about the Lena Herzig injury, we don't know when her return date is. He was very tight-lipped about that, and obviously Arsenal didn't go in for another winger after getting Mariona. So I think Kafaji has a skill set to do it, especially because you're playing with a player as intelligent and as experienced as Mariona, and she can invert with you, she can drop in with you, and that partnership was good. And I also think McCabe did well to work with Kafaji as well. So I think it's definitely something that Arsenal will, maybe even their hand, be forced to play Kafaji in the left wing, especially when the depth isn't there. And to have a player as good as her to be able to play in the attacking midfield, you've got Frida Mornum obviously in there as well. So I think we will be seeing that, whether that's through force, but I also think it's a good thing to be forced. I think she was great, and I definitely think that it worked yesterday. So I hope so. I hope we see a lot more of it, but I also do hope we see a lot more of her majority in their central areas.
Yeah, I think we'll see it for that exact reason. The fact that Jonas kind of wants 4 wide players and he's only really got 3, unless, you use Freya Godfrey or Viv Leah. I think also Arsenal have a lot of depth in that number 10 position, so they can almost spare Kafaji there. Sometimes because Russo can play there, because Frida can play there, even Kim can play there. Like, basically the TLDR answer to this is Arsenal have loads of 10s, but they don't have loads of wide players. So I do think we'll see it. I wouldn't mind betting that in January that gets addressed, that a wide player comes in. Have you got, that was my question, wasn't it?
Yes, sure was. I've got a quick one, because I think this is a quick one to answer before we get to the bigger goal-scoring stuff. This is from Sam Vicarino at Statorino. Do you think Zinsberger deserves to keep her spot? I wasn't convinced by her yesterday, and DVD, Daphne Van Domselaar, will be itching to get on, because I thought that Manu, the Jess Park goal, was a bit of a wonder strike, and not many people, if any, are saving that. And I overall thought she had a very solid performance.
Yep, I have no issues with her performance whatsoever. I think this player has improved so much in the last kind of 18 months. I think that's an interesting question actually as well, because I know who Sam is on Twitter, does lots of like WSL stats, and I don't think he's an Arsenal fan, so maybe I'm wrong about that. I actually don't know who he supports. But anyway, like when we used to do mailbags and stuff, we used to get questions about Manu all the time. They've dried up. And they've dried up because I don't think people think, even if they're not articulating it, like I said, doing these mailbags, it's a great way in to see what supporters are really thinking about. And like most of our questions we have here about finishing, right? And because that's the obvious theme that's coming out. Whereas we used to get loads of questions about Manu. Those questions haven't dried up. I'm not saying everyone's saying they think she's brilliant, but I think subconsciously people have moved on from thinking it's an issue, and that's down to her performances. And I do think like Daphne Van Domselaar will get her chance. We know that the manager likes to rotate the goalkeepers a little bit. I don't know exactly when that will be. Obviously, Daphne missed the whole pre-season because she had that hip injury. She had hip surgery, so there's kind of a need to bring her in slowly anyway. At this moment in time, I'm not taking Manu out. I thought she was very good yesterday. There's nothing she can do about either goal. Very, very assured with her feet. When we're talking about Arsenal playing centrally, out from the back against City's pressure, how many times does Zinsberger give the ball away? Doesn't happen. Like never Never, never, never. Right? She's for short and medium passing, she is at like 99% over 5 years. Like, it is incredible how good she is at that. And I didn't necessarily have an issue with her on crosses or anything. Maybe that's because Arsenal were quite deep in those situations and the centre halves were kind of on the 6-yard line. Maybe if we'd been playing another team, the centre halves would be further up. You'd want her to come out for those. But I think Daphne van Domselaar will get her chance. I do think people will see that Daphne van Domselaar, I think her ceiling is mega high. I think she's got the potential to be like the best goalkeeper in the world, but I think she's quite a way short of that at the moment. I think people will see it when she comes into the team that like she's got some development to go, and I do think there are going to be some mistakes that Arsenal will have to tolerate. But I kind of get it when you've got a new player and she hasn't played yet. Everyone loves the new player. The new player can do no wrong. And the player that's been there, I think we got this with Caitlin last year, like, because she's been there for 4 years, people get bored and they want something new. And for example, I thought Caitlin was quite a bit better than Chloe Lacasse last season. I don't think the Chloe Lacasse signing worked at all. But because Chloe Lacasse was newer, I think people are like, this is the new player. I like the new player. So, look, Daphne will get her chance. I think she'll be a big challenge to Zinsberger, a bigger challenge than any other goalkeeper's given her during her time at Arsenal. But I like Zinsberger on the team sheet. I don't flick an eyelid at that personally. So that's my slightly. You said that was a quick one, and it wasn't. But but there we go. Why don't I ask this one then, and maybe shifting gears a little bit and looking ahead to Thursday, which is a massive game. And I do think, like I said, some of those changes in the forward line, I don't think that was just about Man City. I think there was a bit of a message. And we can talk about this now, some of the answers you got from Jonas about the Häcken game. But this is from Shanna Crossman at Anna_AWFC. What do you think, Jonas, will change from last week's performance against Häcken? Arsenal dominated possession and had good chances to put the game to bed, but didn't. How do you think Arsenal will turn it around at home in the second leg? And maybe you can lead off with the question you asked of Jonas in the Friday press conference, where he used the words, and he used them again on Sunday, that Häcken was a step backwards for the team.
I had this question written down as well. I think it's a great question because there's almost one or two in there. The biggest thing I said and asked of Jonas on Friday was just the low block kind of, like he said, it was a step backwards. Obviously against Rangers, they definitely played a low block and it wasn't the same story. There was goals rattling in everywhere. So it was hard because there were chances, but it was also like knocking on a door, and we've all seen that. And it's like Arsenal are facing the same old demons. And Jonas said it was a big step backwards, and it's this composure. And I think we can use this maybe little caveat of it's pre-season, they're just coming into Champions League, maybe they're working on it, but I don't know if we can use that anymore, especially given how well they performed the week before. I think with Häcken, I would love to see Frida start. I think when she came on in the midweek against Häcken, at halftime, she was probably the strongest player, probably the only player with a high press, really pressing their low block. Everyone else, despite it being a low block, were kind of sitting off and not really giving them much terror, whereas Frida was doing as she does when she's that higher 10 or even almost a 4-4-2 as a double 9. So I'd like to see Frida play, and I also think I would like to see Stina play as well. However, is the best idea with a low block to play a player that can go over the top? No. So you might go with Alessia Russo. She can hold the ball up a little bit. Just want to see Russo floating wide less. I think she used to last season drop deep as a 10. Now I feel like she's dropping wide more, and she doesn't really like to be stay as a 9, which can be beneficial, but it also can be it can be to Arsenal's detriment. So against Häcken, I think it's possession and it's patience, which is almost the opposite of this game, because Arsenal didn't really have the possession. We were almost being patient, waiting for City to blunder and then take it from there. So I'd like to see Frida start. I think that's a start, and I think it's about kind of being patient, not forcing those shots, not blowing them over the crossbar, but it comes into goal scoring, because against Häcken in Gothenburg, the chances were there. It's not like they weren't there, that the chances were there, they weren't being capitalised on. So I can't easily fix that and say, I need Russo to put the ball in the back of the net, because I don't really know tactically what you can do there. And I think once she starts getting in that confidence groove, we've spoken a little bit about like that, hopefully the fountain gate's open. But I want to see a little bit more of an attacking press in the starting lineup. And I think maybe a similar strategy to City would be good, but also they're not going to play a high line like City did. They're going to play a low block. But I would like to see Freedom Arnhem start.
Yeah, I think when I watched the Häcken game back, the press was not good enough from Arsenal. There wasn't nearly enough intensity. And I think because Häcken, they really take risks with the way they play out, because Häcken are almost exactly like Everton in the WSL. They play with the ball centrally. They try and invite you on. And as we saw with the goal, once they've got you all into like one area of the pitch trying to take the ball off them, they switch it on you, and that's where all their chances came from on the night. They get you over, they get you trying to press them, but it felt like Arsenal looked a bit tentative about that, but also they give you chances. And you know, Rose Kafaji had that one where she hit the bar, but I think that's a big part of the reason that 3 of the front 4 changed in this game. I do think there was a bit of a message in there, and you know, I think it's really interesting. First of all, Jonas said to you, and then he said it again on Sunday, that it was a real step back. And I think you see this with Jonas sometimes in the immediate aftermath of a game. He tends to be a bit more positive, but when like a couple of days later, he might say, "Yeah, that was." Because I asked him about the Häcken game in Gothenburg, and he was like, we create loads of chances. If we keep doing that, we'll win. But then a couple of days remove, he's like, this was a step back. This wasn't good enough. We know what we did wrong. And I think he meant the press. I think you're going to see Arsenal fly out of the blocks with a really high press, really like assert themselves onto Häcken early on and try and force those high turnovers. That's where this game's going to be won and lost, because Häcken do that, and they're going to do it again. They are not usually a low block team. That's not how they usually play. They played that way in the second half. Obviously, they've got a 1-goal lead, so now they might play like that a little bit more, but that's not generally who they are. So, yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because I'm expecting like a reaction. I'm expecting almost not a tactical adjustment. I'm almost just expecting, you guys were not good enough last week. Like you didn't put enough in, go and put it right type thing. So yeah, I think it might be a bit more soft factory. Your turn for a question.
Okay, let's go. I'm going to go one from Twitter. It's from So Wow. Are you ready for this username? At 38828282882777M.
Okay.
I
hope that's not a password.
Yeah, I know. Please, I hope that's not your bank details. I thought this question was quite interesting. Not that I necessarily agree with it, but in terms of the goal scoring issue, you spoke a little bit, Tim, about how Beth Mead is probably the hungriest player. And this question says, would you ever consider playing Mead as the 9? She's brilliant with tap-ins and sits in the box, is also more in form with finishing than Russo or Stina at the moment. I am not going to say I agree with this. I think it's an interesting concept because of the goal scoring, but Beth Mead is a wide player ultimately. However, I really wanted to see what you thought about this in a holistic sense.
Yeah, so Beth started very much as a centre forward. If you look at her goal record at Sunderland, don't ask me why I've got this memorised, but it's 75 goals in 77 games. And she won the WSL Golden Boot at Sunderland before she came to Arsenal. So that's who she was when she came to Arsenal. She was a 9. She was a penalty box 9. There's actually a very fascinating story about her crashing her car one Saturday, turning it right over, bad car crash, scored a hat-trick next day against Chelsea. So that's who she was when she came to us. Arsenal moved her out wide. And I think it's really interesting when this happened. It's almost like Gabriel Jesus in the men's team. He started as a winger and became a striker. And I think you can see that in his finishing, that he's not a natural striker. And with Beth, it's like the other way around. She is a natural striker. Now, in terms of would I move her into the centre, I wouldn't be entirely against it. And I do think that maybe when she gets into her 30s, that might happen again. She might go back to being a centre forward. I do think, though, out wide, first of all, I think you need more than one goal threat. And having a wide player who can score loads of goals, you know, I almost look at her a bit like Mo Salah or someone like that, just someone who can play out wide, and because she gets a lot of assists as well. That's the thing. It's not just goals. She sets stuff up, and the way she, nicks the ball off fullbacks and presses, I do think she's very. I'd still keep her out wide, and I think she's very good at that kind of. She doesn't mess about with the ball. I think that's the thing I like about Beth. She doesn't. Everything's quite economical, so it's like one touch, fire the ball in, one touch, shot, one touch, putt. Like she doesn't mess around. Basically, I do think that's a good quality to have out wide. However, if we took the disaster scenario of Stina and Russo both getting injured, for example, then I would not grumble at all if Beth Mead was played up front. I think she can do that. I wouldn't necessarily put her there yet. I do think she might go back there as she gets older. So I like, it's kind of who she is, and I think it's who she will be. I still don't quite think it's who she is now, but I don't think it would be any kind of disaster, if that makes sense. If we stay, okay, we've been promising we'll come to the theme of finishing more widely. And to be fair, I kind of think I've had my say on it more widely. So we had loads of questions about this, but I'm going to pick the one from Adam Salter, at Adam Salter 4, because it came in first. Should we be concerned that Arsenal strikers are running cold at the moment? Arsenal would have won the game comfortably had Stina or Russo been in form. So I've already said I'm very worried about this. I don't think Arsenal have enough killer instinct in the penalty area, and I think they have to find it and find it very quickly. What's your view on it?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, especially with a player like Alessia Russo, because can I be honest, Tim, over the preseason, it was the goal that she scored, that little cheeky outside of the boot tap in the US tour, and I said, okay, this is our player now. She's becoming this kind of killer striker, and we saw it in the latter stages of last season. Even the finish, it's not really to be given a lot of merit, but the finish in the A-League women game, it was like it was an inbox 9 finish. So I was really positive about the fact that she's starting to develop this 20-goal a season striker kind of form. However, it is a glaring issue when it comes to competitive games and bigger, higher stake games. And I'm not saying that should be brushed over, because I am worried, and I think it's more the decision-making that concerns me with the strikers. It's yesterday, the one that came over the top. Stina had the opportunity to chip the keeper. She also had the opportunity to take a touch around the keeper. She ended up taking 3 or 4 and then not hitting the target when she still could have hit the target. And it's this kind of overthinking process, because a player like Sam Kerr, a player like Bunny Shaw, they don't think about it. They have the ball at their feet. That's going in the back of the net. Even Beth Mead is similar to that. And I think that's why that question before was so interesting. It might be a little bit reactionary in my opinion, because I wouldn't be rushing to play Mead as a 9. It's the first WSL game of the season. It probably is going to be okay in the long run, because these are solid players, but you can't really teach a player to have that killer instinct. So it is a little bit worrying, because it's almost something that they're born with and they can only really build. However, I'm not raising the alarm bells until I see more of them. And I think it's funny what you said about Beth Mead before, because under that question I underlined Mo Salah, because I think she is the same player as Mo Salah. She's a wide player, but she plays almost like a striker on the width. So it's interesting, because I think they've got it in the width, but Arsenal, if they want to be the best team in women's football, they need to have a striker that is a killer instinct in that 18-yard box and just wants to put the ball in the back of the net.
Yeah, I think this is it's quite interesting around Barcelona as well, because Barcelona have often not played with that player, actually. But then they've gone and signed Eva Payor this summer, and now they've really got their kind of penalty box striker. But when you're as good as Barca and you generate that many chances, I kind of think you can do that anyway. And listen, we shouldn't dance around this either. This question about finishing will always have the because it's a bit like this game, right? I think in isolation, a coach's job is to come up with a strategy that generates lots of chances. Jonas Eidevall did that yesterday, and then it's down to the players to execute, and they kind of didn't. However, you cannot rid yourself of the context that these are Jonas's players. These are the ones he's chosen, and whether I have the personal energy to talk about it or not, which I kind of don't, but I can't ignore, Arsenal made the decision to not renew Vivianne Miedema's contract. And when you lack killer finishers, that question is always going to come back at you. It just is. And listen, I think there are many good reasons that Viv left, but that is going to come back at you. It's as simple as that. If you're in the fourth year of your team and they're all your players, you've either signed them or extended them, nobody is there that Jonas Heidebauer doesn't want, and you lack something like that, then it kind of is on the manager in a macro sense, if not in a micro sense, in a game like this. So, yeah, I do have a concern about it, but there we go. I answered one of your questions there, but have you got? Sorry, was that your question to me? I've got a terrible short-term memory.
I think that was yours, Adam's.
Yes. Okay, yeah. Okay, so do you have another? We'll perhaps do one more each.
Yeah, this one is honestly on the same vein. I want to hear a little bit more in depth what you think about it, Tim, because I think you're very good at analysing what the players are kind of thinking, as well as the managerial status, and that's building off exactly what you just said. So we're kind of repeating, but I'd like to go further. On Twitter, it was KPUNJ15, asked, is the lack of finishing a coaching or a personnel issue? And you kind of said it there.
Yeah, that's usually, it's a personnel issue, I think, when that happens, but these are the coach's people. This is not his first season. It's not his second season. He's made his choices in terms of forwards and strikers. And this is what I mean about, I think so much about, it is unfair to put it on one player, right? But I do think that's the situation we're in. I think so much about Arsenal's potential this season is tapped into Russo and Russo's ability to finish. And I was really happy at the end of last season and during pre-season that I was seeing that from her. I was thinking, great, it's clicked. She's in the area. She's getting chances. She's finishing them off. This is great. Like I had, probably still do have, but had like a lot of confidence that this player can become a 20-goal a season striker. It's in her and we've got to find it. But you can't really escape that the last 3 games now, Rosenborg, Häcken and Man City, finishing's been an issue. Not just her issue, it's been an overall issue. But I do feel like, to your point, she started to drift again a little bit and started, like no elite striker just stays on the penalty box and says, just give me the ball here. Like, they've got to move around a bit. There's got to be a bit of fluidity. But I do feel like sometimes when things aren't going really, really well, I feel like she chases after the ball. That's her natural instinct, that she's so unselfish that she wants to go and solve the problem and be like, I've got to go and get the ball. I've got to go and help the team. And I think Jonas is trying to coach a bit of a mentality shift into her by saying the way you help the team is to be in the penalty area. And he gave a great answer to a question at the end of last season. He was asked, do you want Russo to be more selfish? And he said, it is not selfish to score goals. He said, as a number 9, your number 1 job is to score goals. That is not selfish. And I think that's the kind of shift. But I've made that very Russo-centric because I do think there's a reality there that we've basically swapped Miedema for Russo. So, that's kind of going to be there. But it is on the other players as well. Caitlin, I really like Caitlin. I think Caitlin's a great player. But we could do with a few more goals a season from her. Frida as well. She scored yesterday. Brilliant. But, I want to see more of those goals from her because she's not going to score like 10, 15, 30 yarders a season. So it is a collective issue. But I also think it's tapped in a little bit to Russo's potential. And yeah, it's both a personnel and a coaching issue. When you're in your 4th season, it's both of them. That's my answer. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's so simple to say it's one or the other, but it's not, because players flourish under the culture that the not just the manager, the coaching staff instills into them. And I think it's hard to say, especially with the Viv situation, is you want that to pay off immediately because you've made this really big, hard decision and you've put that kind of on Russo, and she just tries to do too much because it's like she wants to prove that she's like doing something, and like, we believe that you can do this. We don't need you to prove that you can chase the ball outside of the box. And I think it's interesting, and I don't want to bring him up because he's a bit of a personal enemy right now, but I listened to a podcast a while ago where Russo was asked about strikers that she watches often, and one of them she said was Erling Haaland, because I think Erling Haaland has said something that said, I don't want to touch the ball unless I'm scoring. And that, I think, is something that Russo needs a little bit more of, and I think she's doing a little bit too much, that she's distracted, and it maybe makes the wingers look like they're not providing the service when they are. And I think it's more of a confidence thing for her, because she's finding herself in opportunities sometimes, and we saw it a lot against Rosenborg, and we saw it against Häcken, where she's getting the ball at her feet inside the box and she's firing it over the crossbar, or she's trickling it to the goalkeeper. And I think it's one of those things with the number 9, and she's not that young anymore either. She's closing in a couple years into her prime in a few years' time. So I think it's knocking into her confidence now and saying, hey, if you can't put these away, that's going to make her feel like she needs to, go into other areas and show that she's doing other things. But no, just put the ball in the back of the net. And I think when that comes, she will no longer do the other things, because she is a confidence player. Players like Sam Kerr and Bunny Shaw, they don't need to do that as much. They don't need to find other areas that they can help the team when they're not scoring. I think they'll figure it out. Whereas Russo feels like a confidence player, and I do still believe, because I think she's a very good player, that once those goals come, they will come in large amounts. And I have that belief, and I'm happy to be proved right, but I don't want to be proved wrong, because I feel like I'm putting a lot of belief in her that if those goals come, they will come a lot, and they will come in maximum, because she's a very mental confidence player, as opposed to her form comes in confidence. It doesn't come in physicality. So I think a lot of it rides on the shoulders of Alessia Russo, like you said, Tim, and I feel bad nitpicking on her, but if she's been elected as probably the star striker and the starting number 9 of the team, I want to see more from her.
Yeah, and I suppose, to be fair to her, look, she does get a big chance when she comes on, because she's at centre forward, she just doesn't finish it. Let's finish on this one, which is like an overall, much more of an overall one, but I'm keen to see your take on this. It's from our Discord, from Captain Joseph. How do you rate Arsenal's squad compared to City's and Chelsea's? I watched both games and came away thinking we don't have the same quality of depth. That could be the manager not getting as much out of the players, but I've started to wonder if it's just the quality in the squad. I will say, I think we have a lot more depth than Man City. I think Man City have good attacking depth. In defence, they've got very little. I'm very surprised that they didn't make at least 2 more signings in the summer. I think they're short if they want to do Champions League and the WSL. But obviously they've got loads of attacking strength. They bring on Chloe Kelly and Mary Fowler yesterday. But Arsenal brought on Russo, Kafaji and Beth Mead yesterday, which is not insignificant. So I guess, how do you honestly rate Arsenal's squad player for player up against City and Chelsea?
Yeah, that's an interesting one coming off the back of yesterday, especially because I thought Arsenal's bench made far more of an impact. I think Chloe Kelly, Mary Fowler, Alana Kennedy came on. I think City looked more defensively shaken when Alana Kennedy came on, and I don't think Kelly and Fowler made a massive impact. So, whereas Rosa Kafaji and Beth Mead, they set up the equaliser. So I think that was a lot better. And like your point, Tim, about Man City, my biggest concern is everyone's kind of going around Man City, rallying around, wow, they've got this amazing squad, they've got this amazing squad. If they get one long-term injury in their defence, they are in major trouble, because they don't have backline cover for... We saw it last year when Alex Greenwood got concussed, missed that Brighton game, they lost 1-0. They don't have defensive cover. You can have all the forwards you want, but it's also about utilising and rotating that. I think Chelsea are an exception. I've said it a million times. Their bench could be their starting 11. But again, it's going to be interesting to see how Sonia Bonpasto can manage that. Emma Hayes was 1 in a million in being able to manage that quality of depth. But in terms of Arsenal themselves, I think the depth is there. There's a position in terms of the wing where maybe there needs to be world-class movement. Like you said, I think in January that needs to be something that's focused on. But Rosa Kafaji was excellent yesterday, and I think Jonas is doing very well to utilise what he has. And we saw that with Rosa Kafaji yesterday. I think he utilised the squad that he has. This is an attacking midfielder. He's brought her on. She's made an immediate impact. Beth Mead has done her job as well. So in terms of depth, I thought Arsenal's was far better than City's and far more impactful than City's. I do think the centre-back pairing of Lotte Wobb and Moyne Lyakadina did very well against Bunny Shaw yesterday. However, there were shaky moments, I think. Lee Williamson comes back. That solves that. it'll be interesting to see where Katie Reid goes in terms of that as well and whether she gets minutes. But I'm not worried in Arsenal's depth. I think as well you've got Leah Volti waiting on the wings to come on. She's a world-class 6. So I'm not as worried as I think we should be, especially given the performance yesterday. I thought Arsenal's bench performed far better than City's did.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you look at the unused subs, and Catherine Kuhl, Laura Wienreuter, Daphne van Domselaar. I know she's goalkeeper, so probably isn't going to come on. But sometimes your unused subs tell you something, and this was no Leah Williamson, no Steph Catley available as well, no Victoria Pelova. So I'm with you. I think the depth and the quality is all there, and I think what most of the fans, I think, know Amanda Illestedt as well. Congratulations to her, by the way, on the birth of Myla. I think that a lot of fans are much more in the we really like this squad and we think there's loads of quality and we're not getting the best out of it. I think that's where most Arsenal fans are at the moment, but I could be wrong on that. Nevertheless, that's 80 minutes on this game, which was really, really exciting. I'm not sure all of the podcast will be quite this length. If there's this much to say about Leicester City next weekend, it's probably because something went really wrong, quite frankly. But we will be back with another episode next Monday, probably the day after the Leicester City game in the WSL. And obviously there's the home game against Häcken on Thursday, and we'll probably discuss the ramifications of that one way or another as well. Hopefully we will be in the Champions League group stage draw on Friday, and we'll have a draw to talk about as well. So who knows, maybe it will stretch to 80 minutes. But Jamie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tim. Have a great week and looking forward to Thursday.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, looking forward to dreading all of those things. A bit like yesterday, really. Just a real humdrum and mixture of emotions, but clearly a massive, massive week for Arsenal, which they've started off with a draw at home to Manchester City. Big game against Häcken on Thursday night. They trail 1-0. They've got to turn it round at Meadow Park. I think they will, but we'll see. Maybe the finishing has to improve, though, for that to happen. But until then, thanks so much for joining us, and we will speak to you next week.